In this comparative study, I will be exploring the Western genre by comparing The Revenant, 2015, directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, and comparing it to The Proposition, 2005, directed by John Hillcoat, and demonstrating how liminal space is embodied within the Western genre. The justification for comparing these two films is their differing geographical, historical, and cultural context. The Revenant is an American film set in North America during 1823. The film portrays the hardships of the American frontier from the perspective of a fur trapper, Hugh Glass. After the fur trade company gets attacked by Native Americans, Glass sustains life-threatening injuries from a bear attack. Glass's luck only worsens when his son is murdered by the film's antagonist, Fitzgerald, leaving Glass injured, to have to trek through the hostile wilderness for revenge. The Proposition is an Australian film set in the Australian outback in a developing rural setting during the 1880s, following the horrific rape and murder of the Hopkins family by the infamous Burns brother gang. The protagonist Charlie Burns is made a proposition by the local town authority, Captain Stanley, to bring his older brother Arthur Burns to justice in return for his younger brother Mike Burns' release. He is only given 9 days to do so, and after authority figure Eden Fletcher disapproves of Captain Stanley's proposition, he orders a lashing that ends up killing Mike Burns, leaving an unpopular Captain Stanley wanted by the Burns brother gang. As defined by Julia Thomas, liminal spaces are transitional or transformative spaces. They are the waiting areas between one point in time and space and the next. Bjorn Thomason further states that, more recently, usage of the term has been broadened to describe political and cultural change. The developing civilization depicted in either film's setting reflects upon this cultural change that occurred during the 19th century in both Australia and America's post-colonial settings. I'll be demonstrating this embodiment of liminal space through the conventions of the Western genre. Typically, the Western genre's main convention is the hero. As quoted from John Saunders, the outlaw represents an extreme instance of individualism that is central to the myth of the West. The hero is outside of society. This role is fundamental to the Western as the hero is often the embodiment of liminal space. He is the space between developing civilization and the natural setting. The hero is portrayed as a historical representation of the progressive conjunction of the two opposing values, reflective of the cultural change that took place. Hayward supports this theory by stating, civilization and the open range or wilderness are the two first keys to the typology of this genre. The hero is constantly operating at the point of conjuncture of these two opposing values. In the Revenant's Northern American setting, civilization is portrayed through the use of naturalistic tracking shots which depict civilization as centered around the individual, reflective of the frontiersman. Contrastingly, when Hugh Glass is placed in the wilderness, he is belittled by formalistic visuals that depict immense landscapes, accompanied by a powerful soundtrack, emphasizing the dichotomy between civilization and the wilderness, both visually and historically reflective of cultural change. Contrastingly, the use of camera movement in the Proposition demonstrates the dichotomy between civilization and the wilderness in reverse, as tracking shots and the intense soundtrack are utilized when portraying the Australian landscape, and more formalistic visuals often portray civilization as representative of Australia's laid-back identity. This sense of civilization is often embodied in the woman. As stated by Hayward, the hero never wants to accept civilization, as embodied by the woman, who brings with her from the East Coast the notion of community, family, and so on. Rather, he is always desiring to be on the move in the Wild West. Another convention the Western uses is the revenge narrative, and this is what both the Revenant and the Proposition utilize. Liminal space is as well embodied in the revenge narrative, as it is a transitional process, reflective of the progression of civilization depicted in either film. The revenge narrative consists of a 3-act structure. The first act consisting of the injustice against the central character, the second act the central character then surviving or rehabilitating, and the third act then concluding with the character attaining revenge or justice. After the remaining company men get tired of carrying an injured Hugh Glass through the wilderness, Captain Henry offers money to company men to stay behind with Hugh Glass to see if he recovers or not. Hawke, Bridger, and antagonist Fitzgerald volunteer. Fitzgerald gets impatient and ends up trying to kill Glass. However, Hawke intervenes, but ends up getting stabbed by Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald then tricks Bridger into believing the Native Americans are nearby, and they leave Hugh Glass to die. This murder prompts the beginning of the revenge narrative, and marks the injustice against the central character. As quoted from Hayward, the cowboy with his restless energy and rugged, dogged individualism is the embodiment of the American frontiersmanship, or at least the myth of that frontiersmanship. Frederick Jackson also states that the striking characteristics of the American intellect, restless energy, practical expediency, exuberance, and individualism among them, are the product of the highly charged encounter between civilization and the wilderness, East and West. The frontier experience lies behind so many Western films. Contrastingly, in the proposition's first act, Australia's historical context of having been a penal colony portrays the Australian identity partnered with the idea of mateship. Mateship is an Australian cultural idiom that embodies values of the Australian identity, such as equality, loyalty, and friendship. Nick Dierenfurth's book on mateship, A Very Australian History, states, unlike North America, where historian Frederick Jackson Turner hypothesized that the frontier cultivated individualist values, the Australian outback, according to Ward, produced the collective ethos of mateship. In this case, mateship in the Australian identity is portrayed through Charlie Burns' connection with his younger brother Mike Burns. The motive for Charlie Burns' revenge is embodied in mateship, revenge for a mate. The trial of injustice depicted in both films' first act leaves the protagonist with nothing to lose. As quoted from Haywood, the protagonist is motivated by revenge, but contrary to the complex westerns of the 1950s, there was no visible reason or moral point of view that explained this motivation. The protagonist's rehabilitation in the second act is demonstrated through Hugh Glass's challenge of surviving the bear attack, and then having to tough through the wilderness. Glass is then assisted by a Native American who he forms a bond with. The man then helps rehabilitate him by healing him. This convention is known as the noble savage. As stated by Britannica, the noble savage in literature is an idealized concept of the uncivilized man who symbolizes the innate goodness of one not exposed to the corrupting influences of civilization. After assisting Glass, the noble savage is killed by the French colonists, in which only adds to Glass's motive for revenge. Contrastingly in the proposition, we see Charlie Burns get speared by an indigenous man whilst trying to track down Arthur Burns. The Burns gang conveniently saves him, and the indigenous member of the gang rehabilitates him. Similarly to the convention of the noble savage, the proposition's utilization of the indigenous for narrative purpose is still apparent. The absence of the law is demonstrated in both films as the protagonist takes revenge into their own hands. This convention is known as frontier justice. As quoted from Gonzales Day's book on lynching in the West, the first situation when law and order does not exist, as in the early Western frontier, compels people to take justice into their own hands, in paving the way for establishment of the legal systems. And when legal systems are in place, frontier justice is expected to end. A character from Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight defines frontier justice as,
the people of Red Rock will hang you in the town square. And if all those things end up taking place, that's what civilized society calls justice. However, if the relatives and the loved ones of the person you murdered were outside that door and hung you up by the neck, that would be frontier justice.
In the third act of either film, frontier justice is used as a narrative function to demonstrate the absence of the law and the liminal progression of civilization. The Revenant's third act is the final trial in which Hugh Glass achieves revenge. The epic chase scene shows Glass chasing down Fitzgerald. A fight scene then leads to Glass attaining revenge in an act of frontier justice, but he soon realizes that revenge is bittersweet.
You came all this way just for your revenge, huh? Will you enjoy it, Glass? 'Cause there ain't nothing gonna bring your boy back.
In this final scene, liminal space is portrayed through the use of mise-en-scene, as Glass passes Fitzgerald's body over the river to the Native American people. The river and the scene being the physical embodiment of the dichotomy between civilization and the wilderness. Glass embodying civilization, and the Native American people embodying the wilderness. This transaction between the two opposing values is historically reflective of liminal space in the Western. Similarly, in the proposition's third act, liminal space is embodied through Charlie Burns. In this concluding scene, the Burns gang breaks into Captain Stanley's house for revenge. Mise-en-scene shows Charlie Burns standing between civilization, embodied in Captain Stanley and his wife, and the wilderness, embodied in the Burns gang. Charlie ends up killing his brother Arthur Burns, not just for his brother Mike, but also for the justice for the rape and murder of the Hopkins family. In this scene, Charlie Burns puts an end to the wild. In conclusion, both the Revenant and the proposition embody liminal space through conventions of the Western, such as the convention of the hero, whilst also using the convention of the revenge narrative as a means to portray the liminal period of the Western as a time of transition in both Northern American and Australian culture.